I need to be at the hospital by noon tomorrow. It's not negotiable. My voice trembled as I stood in Jordan's glass-walled office. He barely glanced up from his monitor, swiping through emails with practiced indifference. And the Westbrook presentation is at 1 p.m. Also not negotiable. His voice was flat, emotionless. Figure it out, Mia. That's why you make six figures. I gripped the edge of his desk, my knuckles turning white. My father is having emergency heart surgery. The doctor called an hour ago. This time Jordan did look up, his steel-gray eyes narrowing. And Westbrook Industries is worth $8 million in annual billings. Your choice should be simple. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. That moment, standing in Jordan Mitchell's sleek downtown office, feeling like I was being torn in half, would change everything. Not just my career, but how I understood my own worth, my boundaries, and just how far I'd go to protect what matters. I'm Mia Chen, 34, and until 8 months ago, I was the executive account director at Pinnacle Strategy Group, one of the most prestigious marketing firms in Seattle. I'd spent nearly a decade there, climbing the ranks through sheer determination and more late nights than I care to remember. I'd canceled vacations, worked through pneumonia, and once finished a client proposal from the back of an ambulance after a minor car accident. The deadline doesn't care about your circumstances, Jordan would say. The thing is, I believed him. I believed that exceptional success required exceptional sacrifice. I believed I was proving something, my dedication, my grit, my worthiness. My father called it my overachiever complex. He'd smile when he said it, pride mixing with concern. In his eyes, the world won't stop spinning if you take a day off, little dragon, he'd say, using the nickname he'd given me when I was 5 and insisted on fighting the waves at the beach, refusing to retreat even as they knocked me down again and again. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up a bit. The day started like any other Tuesday. I was at my desk by 6:30 a.m., reviewing analytics for the Westbrook presentation. Westbrook Industries was a family-owned manufacturing giant, old money, with new ambitions. They were looking to rebrand, to shake off their traditional image and position themselves as innovative leaders in sustainable manufacturing. Landing them would be the biggest win of my career, and Jordan's. Jordan Mitchell, my boss and the managing partner at Pinnacle, had been courting Westbrook for almost a year. He'd gone to college with Timothy Westbrook, the founder's grandson and current CEO. But personal connections only open doors, they don't sign contracts. That part required a killer strategy and flawless execution. My part. I was deep into the competitive analysis when my phone vibrated. My sister's name flashed on the screen. I almost sent it to voicemail. It was only 7 a.m. in Portland where she lived, but something told me to pick up. Mia. Her voice was tight, controlled in that way that immediately told me something was wrong. Dad collapsed at the gym. We're at Providence Hospital. The doctors think it's his heart. The world tilted sideways. Our father, at 68, had always been the picture of health, the man who still ran 5 miles every morning, who had only ever been hospitalized once in his life when he broke his arm rock climbing at 60. The idea of him collapsing was almost incomprehensible. What exactly did the doctors say? I asked, already grabbing my bag, mental calculations running. The drive to Portland was 3 hours. I could move my morning meetings, reschedule the client call, work remotely tomorrow. They're still running tests, Kim said. But they mentioned something about a valve issue. He's stable but... She hesitated. He's asking for you. My throat tightened. Our mother had died when we were teenagers, and though Dad had dated occasionally, he'd never remarried. It had been the 3 of us against the world. Kim had stayed close, settling just across town from him with her family. I'd been the one to leave, chasing bigger opportunities in Seattle. I'll be there by noon, I promised, already heading for the door. That's when I ran into Jordan. Where are you going? He asked, blocking my path, coffee in hand. We have the strategy review in 20 minutes. I explained the situation quickly, already mentally in my car, on the road. I see, he said, in a tone that clearly conveyed he didn't. And the Westbrook presentation? The one we've been preparing for 3 months? The one scheduled for tomorrow. At 1 p.m.? I'll handle it remotely, I said. I can finalize everything tonight and, remotely? Jordan cut me off with a short laugh. Mia, these are old school people. They expect us to look them in the eye when we ask for $8 million. Timothy specifically requested you be there after the preliminary meeting. My father might need surgery, I said, my voice rising slightly. A few heads turned in our open plan office. Jordan steered me into a nearby conference room, closing the door. His face softened into what I now recognize as manufactured concern. I'm sorry about your father, truly. Family is important. He paused. So is this account. So is your future here. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The threat wasn't subtle. Jordan had a particular talent for making career ultimatums sound like friendly advice. Take today, he continued. Go see your father. But I need you back here tomorrow morning to finalize the presentation, and in that conference room at 1 p.m. Timothy respects you. He trusts you. Without you there? He shrugged. Well, let's just say our chances drop significantly. And if my father is having surgery tomorrow? I asked, already knowing the answer. Then you have a difficult decision to make, Jordan said simply. That's the reality of being at this level. Sometimes we have to prioritize. I left without responding, anger and anxiety churning in my stomach. As I drove south on I-5 toward Portland, my mind raced between concern for my father and panic about the presentation. I called Kim for updates, then my assistant to rearrange my schedule, then the account team to delegate urgent tasks. By the time I reached Providence Hospital, I'd lost count of how many calls I'd made. What I do remember clearly is walking into that hospital room and seeing my father, my invincible, larger-than-life father, looking small against the white sheets, monitoring wires snaking from beneath his hospital gown. There's my little dragon, he said, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it, but his smile the same as always. Kim was sitting beside him, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. The doctor came in shortly after I arrived. Dr. Patel was direct but kind. The tests confirm what we suspected. You have severe aortic stenosis, a narrowing of the heart valve. You need surgery, and soon. How soon? My father asked. I've scheduled you for tomorrow at noon, she replied. We don't want to wait on this. The timing hit me like a physical blow. Noon tomorrow. 1 hour before the Westbrook presentation. 3 hours away from where I needed to be. After Dr. Patel left, my father noticed my expression. What is it, Mia? Besides the obvious old man with a bum ticker. I tried to smile. It's nothing. Just work stuff. The big presentation, he said. It wasn't a question. I'd mentioned it during our weekly Sunday calls, proud that I'd been chosen to lead it. It doesn't matter, I said firmly. I'll be here. My father studied my face in that way he had, seeing straight through my confident facade. How much is this account worth? Dad, humor me. I'm the one having heart surgery. I get to ask nosy questions. 8 million, I admitted. Annually. With a 3-year minimum contract. He whistled, then winced slightly. And your boss is making you choose. It wasn't a question either. I didn't respond directly. I already told Kim I'd stay at her place tonight. I'll be here all day tomorrow. My father reached for my hand. His grip still surprisingly strong. Mia, listen to me. I have the best doctors, your sister, and enough support to start a small fan club. What I don't have is a daughter who throws away career-defining opportunities because I wore out a valve. He squeezed my hand. Go back to Seattle tonight. Do your presentation. Then come back here and tell me all about how you knocked their socks off. Dad, no. I need to be here. For what? To sit in the waiting room staring at old magazines while I'm unconscious? To bring me Jell-O after I'm out of recovery? He shook his head. That's not why I raised a dragon. We argued for almost an hour. Kim stayed quiet through most of it, but eventually sighed and said, he's not going to give in, Mia. You know how stubborn he is. Eventually, I agreed to a compromise. I would stay until early morning, then drive back to Seattle for the presentation, and return immediately after. It felt wrong, but my father was insistent. Promise me, he said. Promise you won't throw away this opportunity. I promised, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. That night, after my father had fallen asleep, I sat in the hospital room with my laptop, finalizing slides, checking data, and making notes. Kim had gone home to her family, promising to return first thing in the morning. The only sounds were the steady beep of the heart monitor and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes. In the hallway. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email from Jordan, confirmed Westbrook will bring their entire executive team. Stakes just got higher. Need you sharp tomorrow. No, how's your father? No acknowledgement of the impossible position I was in. Just more pressure. And that's when an idea began to form. A risky, potentially career-ending idea. Pinnacle, like most agencies, used a secure cloud platform for client presentations. As executive account director, I had administrator access to the entire system, including the ability to create, edit, or schedule content to appear during presentations. The Westbrook deck was already uploaded and ready. But what if I added something else? Something that would appear at a strategic moment during the presentation? I opened a new document and began to type. Not angry accusations or emotional pleas, but data. Cold, hard facts about Pinnacle's employee turnover rate, 78% higher than industry average. Screenshots of emails from Jordan to various team members. Demanding work during family emergencies, hospital stays, even one where he asked an account manager to cut short her maternity leave. Statistics on how many nights per month employees worked past 10 p.m., average, 18. And finally, a section about Pinnacle's performance metrics that clearly showed how client satisfaction inversely correlated with employee burnout. The data was damning. Teams with sustainable workloads actually produced better results and retained clients longer. All of this information was available in our internal systems. I'd just never compiled it in one place before. Never seen the pattern so clearly. I scheduled this document to appear automatically at exactly 1:20 p.m., 20 minutes into the presentation, when Jordan would typically be transitioning from company overview to strategic approach. Was it sabotage? Maybe. Was it career suicide? Possibly. But sitting there in that hospital room, watching my father's chest rise and fall, I realized something important. I was tired of the false choice between being successful and being human. At 5 a.m., I kissed my sleeping father's forehead, left a note for Kim explaining that I'd call from the road, and began the drive back to Seattle. As the sun rose over the mountains, I felt strangely calm. Whatever happened next, I had made my decision. I arrived at the office by 9 a.m., rumpled but determined. Jordan was already there, immaculate in his custom suit, not a hair out of place. "You made it," he said, relief evident in his voice. "How's your father?" "Scheduled for surgery at noon," I replied, the words like ashes in my mouth. Jordan nodded absently, already moving on. "The team's waiting in the strategy room. We need to make some last-minute adjustments based on the background research that came in overnight." The next 3 hours were a blur of revisions, rehearsals, and last-minute touches. I moved through it all on autopilot, checking my phone whenever possible for updates from Kim. At 11:30, she texted, "They're prepping him now. He says to knock him dead." At noon, the Westbrook team arrived, Timothy Westbrook himself, along with his CFO, CMO, and 4 other executives. They were exactly as Jordan had described, old school, traditional, but with a clear desire to modernize their image. Timothy greeted me warmly, mentioning that he'd been impressed by my preliminary strategy outline. At 12:15, as we were settling into the conference room, my phone vibrated. "He's in surgery now. All looks good so far. Focus on your meeting. We'll update." At 12:30, Jordan began the presentation, all confidence and carefully cultivated charm. He introduced the company, highlighted our successes, and spoke about our unique culture of excellence. At 12:50, he handed over to me for the strategic portion. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and began walking the Westbrook team through our proposed approach. My voice was steady, my points clear and compelling. On the outside, I was the consummate professional. Inside, I was counting down the minutes. At precisely 1:20 p.m., as I clicked to advance to the next slide, the screen changed, not to our carefully designed market analysis, but to the document I'd created during the night. The bold title read, "Pinnacle Strategy Group, The Hidden Costs of Success." The room went silent. Jordan half rose from his chair, confusion turning to horror as he realized what was happening. I continued speaking as if this had been part of the plan all along. "At Pinnacle, we believe in transparency," I said, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Before we ask you to trust us with your brand, it's important you understand how we operate." I walked them through the data methodically. The turnover rates. The correlation between burnout and client satisfaction. The emails, with names redacted, but dates and timestamps visible, showing Jordan's demands that employees prioritize work over health, family emergencies, and basic human needs. "The reason this matters to Westbrook," I concluded, "is that the team assigned to your account would be operating under these conditions. And the data clearly shows that while this approach might yield short-term results, it ultimately leads to inconsistent quality, relationship breakdown, and diminished ROI." Timothy Westbrook was leaning forward, his expression unreadable. The CFO was taking notes. Jordan was frozen, his face a mask of controlled rage. "Mia," he finally said, his voice dangerously soft. "I think there's been a technical error. Perhaps we should take a short break while we resolve it." "No error," I replied calmly. Just additional context I felt was relevant. Timothy cleared his throat. "I appreciate candor, Ms. Chen. It's refreshing in this industry." He turned to Jordan. "Is this information accurate?" Jordan's recovery was impressive. His smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. Some of this data is being presented without proper context. We do have demanding clients and deadlines, as any successful agency does. We ask a lot of our team because excellence requires commitment. My father is in surgery right now, I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. Heart surgery. Jordan made it clear that if I wasn't here today, my future at Pinnacle would be in jeopardy. The room went silent again. Jordan's smile vanished completely. Timothy Westbrook looked between us, then checked his watch. It's 1:30. When did the surgery start? Noon, I replied. Timothy nodded slowly, then stood. I think we've seen enough for today. My team and I need to discuss. Jordan immediately launched into damage control, but Timothy held up a hand. We'll be in touch, he said firmly. Then, to me, Miss Chen, go be with your family. Some things matter more than business. As the Westbrook team filed out, Jordan turned to me, his expression murderous. My office. Now. I followed him, strangely calm. In his office, he closed the door with controlled precision. What the hell was that? He hissed. That was the truth, I replied. Something this company has been missing for a long time. You just cost us an $8 million client. You're fired. Security will escort you out. I nodded, having expected nothing less. I understand. I'll pack my things. You'll never work in this industry again, he added, the threat clear in his voice. I'll make sure of it. I looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. Jordan Mitchell, with his perfect suits and perfect hair and perfect life built on the sacrifices of others. He suddenly seemed smaller, less intimidating. Maybe, I acknowledged. But before I go, you should know something. That presentation went to more than just the people in that room. His eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I scheduled the same document to be emailed to every current Pinnacle client, the executive board, and HR at 2 p.m. today, I said. Along with a more comprehensive report detailing how your management practices have directly resulted in client losses over the past 3 years. It was a bluff. I hadn't actually done that, I'm not completely self-destructive. But Jordan didn't know that. The color drained from his face. You wouldn't. The same way I wouldn't choose my father's heart surgery over a client meeting? I asked quietly. You never really knew me at all, Jordan. I walked out of his office with my head high, ignoring the stares of my colleagues. At my desk, I quickly packed my personal items into a box, then texted Kim, on my way. How's Dad? Her reply came immediately, out of surgery. Doctor says it went perfectly. He's in recovery. Relief washed over me so intensely I had to sit down. He was okay. Whatever happened next, my father was okay. As I stood to leave, my phone rang. Unknown number. Mia Chen, I answered. MS. Chen, this is Timothy Westbrook. I froze. Mr. Westbrook. I apologize for how the meeting ended. Don't apologize, he said. I admire integrity, even when it's uncomfortable. The data you presented was concerning, but your willingness to risk your position to provide transparency was impressive. I wasn't sure how to respond. I'm calling because I'd like to meet with you privately next week, he continued. My company is establishing an in-house marketing division, and we need leadership that values both excellence and humanity. Would you be interested in discussing that opportunity? The world seemed to tilt sideways for the second time in 2 days. Yes, I would. Good. Have your father call me when he's recovered. I had a valve replacement myself 3 years ago. I might have some useful advice for him. After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence for a moment before gathering my box and walking toward the elevator. As the doors were closing, a hand shot out to stop them. Jordan. We need to talk, he said, stepping in. The doors closed, leaving us alone. I have nothing more to say, I replied, staring straight ahead. Westbrook just called me, he said. They're pulling out of negotiations with Pinnacle. He mentioned something about company culture not aligning with their values. I said nothing. This will damage the firm, Jordan continued, his voice tight. People could lose their jobs. People have been losing their humanity here for years, I countered. That seemed to concern you less. The elevator reached the lobby. As I stepped out, Jordan grabbed my arm. This isn't over, Mia. I looked down at his hand, then back at his face. Actually, it is. I chose both my father and my career today. I just didn't choose you. I walked out of Pinnacle Strategy Group for the last time, got into my car, and drove straight back to Portland. The 3-hour drive gave me plenty of time to panic about what I'd done, to second-guess every decision. By all rational measures, I had just committed career suicide. I had no job, potentially no references, and had publicly humiliated one of the most connected men in the industry. But beneath the panic was something else. Something that felt strangely like freedom. My father was awake when I arrived at the hospital, groggy but alert. Kim was sitting beside him, and the relief on her face when she saw me was palpable. "How'd it go?" my father asked, his voice raspy. I sat on the edge of his bed and took his hand. "I got fired," I admitted. "But I also might have a new job offer. It's been an eventful day." My father's laugh was weak but genuine. "That's my dragon. Never does anything halfway." As I sat there, surrounded by the people who mattered most, I realized something important. The choice Jordan had forced on me wasn't really about being present for my father's surgery versus attending a client meeting. It was about what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of life I wanted to live. For too long, I'd accepted the false narrative that success required sacrificing everything else: health, relationships, humanity. I'd convinced myself that working through pneumonia or missing family events was a badge of honor rather than a warning sign. That day marked the beginning of a different path. Over the next few weeks, as my father recovered and I interviewed with Westbrook Industries, I began to understand just how toxic Pinnacle's culture had been, and how completely I had internalized it. Timothy Westbrook offered me the position of Chief Marketing Officer for their new in-house division, with a salary higher than what I'd made at Pinnacle and explicit expectations about work-life boundaries. "I want innovation and excellence," he said, "but I want it from whole humans, not burned-out shells." As for Jordan, I heard through industry connections that the board had launched an investigation into Pinnacle's management practices following unusually high client turnover. 3 months after my departure, Jordan was asked to resign. The official story cited strategic differences, but the unofficial word was that too many clients and employees had similar stories about his leadership style. Did I feel vindicated? Yes, but not in the way I expected. The real victory wasn't seeing Jordan face consequences, it was breaking free from the mindset he represented. The belief that worth is measured solely by productivity. That sacrifice must come at the expense of humanity. That success and compassion are somehow mutually exclusive. My father recovered fully from his surgery. At his 6-month checkup, his cardiologist declared him healthier than patients half his age. He retired from teaching that year, finally, taking the around-the-world trip he'd been planning for decades. And me? I built a marketing team at Westbrook based on principles of excellence and sustainability. We implemented life-first policies: no emails after 7 p.m., mandatory vacation time, flexible work during family emergencies. The results spoke for themselves: higher quality work, better client relationships, and virtually no turnover. 2 years after that fateful day, I received an industry award for marketing innovation. As I stood at the podium, I saw many familiar faces from my Pinnacle days: former colleagues who had found their way to healthier work environments, clients who had followed me to Westbrook, even a few Pinnacle executives who had overseen the company's culture transformation after Jordan's departure. I didn't see Jordan. I heard he had moved to a smaller firm in another city, still chasing the next big client, still believing that success comes from grinding people down rather than building them up. In my acceptance speech, I didn't mention him or Pinnacle by name. Instead, I talked about the false choices we're often presented with in our careers: excellence or balance, success or humanity, ambition or compassion. The greatest lie in business, I said, is that we must choose between being successful and being human. The truth is that sustainable success can only come from embracing our humanity, our need for rest, for connection, for purpose beyond profit. The companies that understand this aren't just more humane places to work, they're more innovative, more resilient, and ultimately more successful. As I looked out at the audience, I caught my father's eye. He was beaming, prouder of those words than any account I'd ever landed or award I'd ever won. Later, at the reception, a young woman approached me, an account coordinator at a firm I recognized as having a particularly brutal reputation. "I've been told I need to choose," she said quietly, "between my mother's cancer treatments and a client presentation. That I need to prove my commitment." I placed my hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to choose," I told her. "And any company that asks you to isn't worthy of your talent." That conversation with the young account coordinator was still on my mind the next morning as I drove to Westbrook's headquarters. 2 years had passed since my confrontation with Jordan, but the memory remained vivid, not just of what I'd done, but of how close I'd come to making the wrong choice. The Westbrook campus was nothing like Pinnacle's sleek downtown high-rise. Located just outside the city, it spread across 10 acres of landscaped grounds, the main building a thoughtful blend of industrial heritage and modern sustainability. My office overlooked a courtyard where employees could work outside when weather permitted, which, in Seattle, was admittedly less often than we'd like. "Morning, Mia," called Alex, my deputy director, as I passed his desk. "Ready for the quarterly review?" I nodded, balancing my coffee while scrolling through messages on my phone. "Just need to finish this email to my dad. He's sending photos from Croatia every hour, apparently." Alex laughed. "Living his best retirement life. How long is his trip again?" 6 months, for continents, I replied, smiling despite the twinge of worry I still felt whenever I thought about my father traveling so far from home. The cardiologist had cleared him, of course, but after coming so close to losing him, part of me wanted to keep him wrapped in bubble wrap forever. The more rational part knew that would defeat the purpose of saving his life in the first place. My phone buzzed with a notification. An email from an address I didn't recognize, recruitment at Meridian Partners. The subject line read simply, opportunity to discuss. Meridian Partners was Pinnacle's main competitor, larger, more established, with offices in 12 countries. I hesitated before opening it, my finger hovering over the screen. "Everything okay?" Alex asked, noticing my expression. "Fine," I said, clicking the email open. "Just unexpected correspondence." The message was brief and professional. Meridian's executive board wanted to meet with me about a potential leadership position. The compensation package would be significantly competitive and the role would offer global strategic oversight. I closed the email without responding, unsettled. For reasons I couldn't immediately identify. 2 years ago, an offer like this would have been the pinnacle of success, validation that my career hadn't been derailed by the Pinnacle incident. Now, it felt like an intrusion from a world I'd deliberately left behind. "Mia?" Alex was waiting. Presentation materials in hand. "Sorry," I said, pocketing my phone. "Let's go crush this review." The quarterly meeting went smoothly. Timothy Westbrook, now both my boss and mentor, nodded approvingly as my team presented the results of our latest campaign, a 42% increase in qualified leads, a 28% boost in brand recognition metrics, and most importantly, a 17% increase in conversion from our sustainability-focused messaging. "Excellent work," Timothy said when we finished. "Particularly impressive considering the constraints of the market this quarter." He didn't add, "and the fact that your team works reasonable hours and takes vacations," but the implication was there. We'd proven, quarter after quarter, that sustainable work practices produced sustainable results. After the meeting, Timothy asked me to stay behind. He waited until the others had filed out before speaking. "Meridian reached out to you, didn't they?" he asked, surprising me. "How did you know?" He smiled slightly. "Because they reached out to me first, asking if I'd consider an acquisition. When I declined, I assumed they'd go after my leadership team directly." He studied my face. "Are you interested?" I considered the question honestly. "I'm flattered, but no. I'm building something meaningful here." Timothy nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Because I'd hate to lose you." He paused. "Though I wouldn't stand in your way if that's what you wanted." The contrast between his attitude and Jordan's wasn't lost on me. One viewed employees as assets to be controlled, the other, as humans making their own choices. "I'm not going anywhere," I assured him. "But thank you for understanding that it's my decision to make." Back in my office, I found a text from my sister, "Call me when you can. Nothing urgent." I dialed her immediately, familiar anxiety fluttering in my chest despite her assurance. Since Dad's surgery, any unexpected communication triggered that response. "Hey," Kim answered on the first ring. "How's my favorite corporate rebel?" I laughed, relieved by her light tone. "Fine. What's up?" "Just thought you should know that Jordan Mitchell is back in town." My breath caught. "What? How do you know?" "Lisa from my yoga class works at Meridian now. She mentioned they've brought him on as a consultant for some big reorganization." Meridian. The email suddenly made more sense, and felt significantly more ominous. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Are you okay?" Kim asked, not fooled for a second. "I know you haven't seen him since." "Since I torpedoed his career and walked out?" "Yeah, it's been a peaceful 2 years. Isite. I'm fine, really. Just surprised." After we hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen, unseeing. Jordan at Meridian. Meridian reaching out to me. The timing couldn't be coincidental. My assistant knocked lightly on my open door. "Your 3 o'clock is here. The Sustainability Committee?" I nodded, pushing thoughts of Jordan aside. "Send them in." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and decisions. By the time I headed home, darkness had fallen, rain pattering against my windshield as I navigated the evening traffic. My condo building's underground parking was nearly full, unusual for a Tuesday night, forcing me to take a spot near the far wall. As I walked toward the elevator, keys in hand, a figure stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. I startled, nearly dropping my bag. "Hello, Mia." Jordan Mitchell looked exactly the same, perfectly tailored suit, expertly styled hair, that smile that never quite reached his eyes. Only now I recognized the calculation behind it, the way it was weaponized rather than shared. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, heart racing. "How did you get in the garage?" He shrugged, unconcerned. "I followed another resident in. Building security could use some improvement." "That's trespassing. I could call the police." "Always so dramatic," Jordan said, his voice smooth as ever. "I just want to talk." 5 minutes. I crossed my arms, keeping several feet between us. "Talk. Meridian contacted you today, I assume? That was your doing?" He inclined his head slightly. "I suggested they consider you for the position. Your particular talents could be valuable to them." "My talents weren't valuable enough to allow me time for my father's surgery," I replied coldly. "What changed?" Jordan's smile tightened. "Let's just say I've had 2 years to reflect on our working relationship. I may have been inflexible at times." "Inflexible," I repeated. "That's what you call forcing employees to choose between their families and their jobs? Making people work through medical emergencies? Creating a culture of fear and burnout?" "I call it maintaining standards in an industry where excellence is the minimum requirement," he countered. "But I acknowledge that certain accommodations could have been made in specific circumstances." It wasn't an apology. Not even close. "Why are you really here, Jordan?" I asked, tired of the game. His expression shifted, the veneer of civility slipping just slightly. "Meridian is planning to acquire Westbrook Industries. Timothy hasn't told the staff yet, but the preliminary talks have begun. When the acquisition goes through, I'll be overseeing the integration of marketing operations." The statement hit me like a physical blow. "You're lying. Timothy would never sell to Meridian." "Everyone has their price, Mia. Even principled men like Timothy Westbrook." Jordan took a step closer. "When it happens, and it will happen, you have 2 choices. You can join Meridian in the role they've offered, where I'll generously overlook our past disagreements. Or you can find yourself once again looking for employment, this time with a reputation for being difficult and uncooperative." "You haven't changed at all," I said quietly. "On the contrary," Jordan replied. "I've learned a great deal. Including how to neutralize threats before they materialize." He checked his watch, a casual gesture that I now recognized as carefully choreographed. "Think about it. Meridian will expect your response by the end of the week." He turned and walked toward the exit, calling over his shoulder, "Oh, and Mia? Your father looks well in those photos from Split. The waterfront there is particularly beautiful this time of year." I stood frozen until the garage door closed behind him, the implied threat hanging in the air. He'd been monitoring my father's travels. The message was clear, nothing was off limits. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, mind racing. If what Jordan said was true, if Meridian was really acquiring Westbrook, everything I'd built over the past 2 years would be at risk. Not just my job, but the culture we'd created, the policies that protected work-life balance, the entire ethos of the marketing division. And if Jordan was put in charge? He would dismantle it all out of spite. Around 3 a.m., I made a decision. Opening my laptop, I began to gather information, financial reports, client satisfaction data, employee retention statistics. If Meridian was planning a hostile takeover, they would need ammunition to convince shareholders. I needed to know what they might be using. What I found surprised me. Despite our humanistic approach to work, Westbrook's marketing division was outperforming industry benchmarks across nearly every metric. Our campaigns had higher engagement rates, our client relationships lasted longer, and our profit margins were actually superior to those of agencies with burnout cultures. The data told a clear story: treating employees like humans wasn't just morally right, it was better business. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report, then crafted an email to Timothy Westbrook requesting an urgent meeting. Just as I was about to hit send, another approach occurred to me. Jordan had taught me one valuable lesson during my years at Pinnacle: information was power. And I needed more information before making any moves. I deleted the email draft and instead sent a brief, professional response to Meridian accepting their invitation to discuss the position further. Then I called my sister. "I need a favor," I said when she answered, groggy with sleep. "Can you contact Dad and ask him to be extra cautious? Don't post his location publicly, vary his routine, that sort of thing." "Mia, you're scaring me," Kim said, now fully awake. "What's going on?" I explained my encounter with Jordan, his implied threat, and the potential Meridian acquisition. You need to go to the police, Kim insisted. And tell them what? That my former boss made a vague comment about my father's vacation photos? That he's potentially involved in a perfectly legal corporate acquisition? I sighed. Just ask Dad. To be careful, okay? I'll handle the rest. The meeting with Meridian was scheduled for Thursday morning at their downtown offices, a gleaming skyscraper that made Pinnacle's building look modest by comparison. I dressed carefully in a charcoal gray suit that projected confidence without aggression, my armor for the battle ahead. The Meridian executive team was waiting in a conference room on the 40th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city and Puget Sound beyond. 5 men, 2 women, all watching me with the calculated interest of predators. Assessing potential prey. Jordan sat among them, not leading the meeting but clearly present by design. Ms. Chen, began Elaine Winters, Meridian's CEO. Thank you for joining us. We've been following your career with interest. Particularly your innovative approach at Westbrook, added Richard Barnes, their chief strategy officer. The sustainability messaging pivot was especially impressive. I smiled politely. Thank you. I'm curious, though, why approach me now? Elaine and Richard exchanged glances. We're expanding our leadership team as part of a broader strategic initiative, Elaine said carefully. Your experience aligns with our needs. And does this strategic initiative include acquiring Westbrook Industries? I asked directly. The momentary silence confirmed Jordan had been telling the truth. Elaine recovered quickly. We don't discuss potential acquisitions outside of confirmed announcements, she said smoothly. But we are always looking for growth opportunities that align with our vision. And what vision is that, exactly? I pressed. Because from what I understand, Meridian's approach to work-life balance is quite different from what I've implemented at Westbrook. Richard leaned forward. Culture evolves, Ms. Chen. We're interested in learning from successful models, including yours. It was a practiced line, undoubtedly true in the abstract but meaningless in practice. Jordan's slight smirk told me everything. I needed to know about how my model would be treated post-acquisition. I appreciate your interest, I said, standing. But I need to be transparent. I have no intention of leaving Westbrook, and I have serious concerns about Meridian's potential acquisition plans. Jordan's smirk vanished. Elaine's expression hardened. That's disappointing to hear, she said coolly. Particularly given the inevitability of certain business developments. Nothing in business is inevitable, I replied. Successful acquisitions require board approval, shareholder support, and regulatory clearance. They also typically benefit from the cooperation of key leadership. The threat was clear, as was my counter-threat. I could make their acquisition significantly more difficult. Perhaps we should continue this discussion another time, Richard suggested, standing to end the meeting. I nodded politely to the group, deliberately avoiding eye contact with Jordan, and left the room. As the elevator descended, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Timothy, need to meet. Today if possible. Critical information about Meridian. His response came immediately, my office. 2 p.m. I spent the intervening hours refining my report, adding the confirmation I'd gleaned from the Meridian meeting. By the time I arrived at Timothy's office, I had a clear picture of what we were facing, and a potential strategy to counter it. Timothy was alone, standing at the window overlooking the courtyard. He turned when I entered, his expression grave. You know, he said simply. I nodded. Jordan Mitchell told me. He's working with Meridian as a consultant on the acquisition. Timothy's eyebrows rose. Jordan Mitchell? Your former boss? The one and only. He ambushed me in my parking garage. To deliver the news personally. I set my laptop on his desk. He also implied that Meridian would dismantle everything we've built in the marketing division once they take over. Timothy sighed heavily, sinking into his chair. The board is considering their offer. It's significant, well above market value. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, the hurt evident in my voice despite my efforts to remain professional. Because I've been fighting it, he replied. The vote isn't until next week. I was hoping to present an alternative before then. I opened my laptop, turning the screen toward him. I may have an alternative. For the next hour, I walked Timothy through my analysis, the superior performance metrics of our humane approach, the client retention statistics, the innovation outcomes. I then presented a bold proposal, a management-led buyout of Westbrook's marketing division, spinning it off as an independent agency with Timothy as chairman and myself as CEO. The numbers work, I concluded. We're profitable enough to secure financing, and we could retain our current client base while expanding into new sectors. Most importantly, we'd preserve the culture we've built. Timothy studied the proposal in silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions or testing assumptions. Finally, he looked up at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You've thought of everything," he said. "Except one detail." "What's that?" "Why limit this to the marketing division? Why not propose a management buyout of the entire company?" I blinked, momentarily speechless. "The whole company? That would require significant capital, which we could raise," Timothy interrupted, suddenly energized. "The board is considering Meridian's offer because they believe it's the best path forward for shareholders. If we can present a competitive alternative that preserves jobs and company values." He trailed off, mind clearly racing. "You think it's possible?" I asked, hope rising. "I think you've just given me exactly what I needed to fight this acquisition," Timothy replied. "And I think Jordan Mitchell made a serious mistake bringing you into this." For the next 5 days, we worked almost around the clock, a temporary suspension of our work-life balance principles that everyone involved agreed was necessary. We assembled a team of trusted executives, financial advisors, and legal counsel to structure the buyout proposal. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, a fair market offer to shareholders, backed by a consortium of ethical investors and current management, with guarantees of job security for existing employees and continuation of Westbrook's sustainability initiatives. What made it powerful, though, was the data. My report demonstrating the business advantages of our human-centered approach became the centerpiece of our pitch. This wasn't just about preserving company culture, it was about maximizing long-term value and competitive advantage. The night before the board meeting, I received another text from an unknown number: "You're making a mistake. Last chance to reconsider." JM, I didn't bother responding. Jordan had taught me many things during my time at Pinnacle, but the most valuable lesson was one he never intended: that fear only has power when you give it permission. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday. By 8:30, the executive team was assembled in the conference room, reviewing our presentation one final time. Timothy looked calm and focused, every inch the seasoned CEO despite the stakes. At precisely 9, the board members filed in, 8 men and women who collectively controlled Westbrook's fate. Among them was Eleanor Westbrook, Timothy's aunt and the company's largest individual shareholder. Her support would be crucial. Meridian's representatives entered next: Elaine Winters, Richard Barnes, and, unsurprisingly, Jordan Mitchell. His expression betrayed nothing when he saw me sitting at Timothy's right hand, but the slight tightening of his jaw told me he understood what we were attempting. "Thank you all for coming," Timothy began. "We're here to discuss Meridian Partners' acquisition offer and to present an alternative proposal for the board's consideration." For the next 30 minutes, Timothy outlined our management buyout plan, emphasizing the financial benefits to shareholders while preserving Westbrook's legacy and values. I then presented my portion, the business case for our human-centered approach, backed by 2 years of performance data. "In conclusion," I said, meeting the gaze of each board member in turn, "the evidence is clear. Westbrook's current model isn't just morally superior, it's demonstrably more effective at generating sustainable growth and shareholder value." When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Elaine Winters stood. "This is an impressive presentation," she acknowledged. "But it relies on limited data from a relatively short time frame. Meridian has a proven track record spanning decades, and our offer represents a significant premium over current market value." The debate that followed was intense but respectful. Numbers were challenged, assumptions questioned, projections scrutinized. Through it all, Jordan remained silent, watching with calculating eyes. Finally, as the discussion seemed to be winding down, Eleanor Westbrook spoke for the first time. "I'd like to ask Mr. Mitchell a question, if I may," she said, her voice soft but commanding attention. "You previously worked with Ms. Chen at Pinnacle Strategy Group, correct?" Jordan nodded cautiously. "That's correct. And during that time? You insisted she attend a client meeting rather than be with her father during critical heart surgery, did you not?" The room went perfectly still. Jordan's expression flickered with surprise before settling into practiced neutrality. "That characterization is not entirely accurate," he replied carefully. "No?" Eleanor removed a folded paper from her portfolio. "I have here an email from you to Ms. Chen, dated 2 years ago. It reads, and I quote, 'Your choice should be simple. 8 million in billings or your father's surgery. Professionals don't hesitate.'" She looked up. "Is this your email, Mr. Mitchell?" Jordan's face had gone pale. "I don't recall the exact wording, it's a yes or no question," Eleanor interrupted. After a tense moment, Jordan nodded once. "Yes." Eleanor turned to the board. "My late brother, Timothy's father and our company's founder, built Westbrook. On the principle that business success and human decency are not mutually exclusive. That principle has guided us for 3 generations. She closed her portfolio decisively. I've heard enough. I move that we reject Meridian's offer and proceed with the management buyout proposal. The silence following Eleanor's declaration felt electric. Jordan's face had gone from pale to an interesting shade of gray. Elaine Winters, Meridian's CEO, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly sensing the dramatic shift in momentum. I kept my expression neutral, though inside my heart was racing. Timothy caught my eye briefly, a nearly imperceptible nod passing between us. We'd prepared for many scenarios, but Eleanor Westbrook's intervention hadn't been among them. Sometimes the universe delivers justice in unexpected ways. The board secretary cleared her throat. We need a second for Mrs. Westbrook's motion. I second, said Mia Chen, no relation to me, a board member who had been quietly supportive. During our presentation, the chairman called for a vote. One by one, board members voiced their positions. 7 votes for the management buyout, 1 abstention. The Meridian acquisition was officially rejected. Well then, the chairman said, it appears we have a decision. The board approves the management-led buyout proposal as presented. Legal counsel will prepare the necessary documents for execution. The Meridian representatives gathered there. Materials in stony silence. Elaine approached Timothy, extending her hand with professional grace despite the defeat. A well-executed defense, Timothy. Perhaps we'll have the opportunity to work together under different circumstances in the future. Timothy shook her hand. I look forward to competing with Meridian in the marketplace, Elaine. Jordan didn't approach me. Instead, he walked directly toward the exit, shoulders rigid with controlled fury. Just as he reached the door, Eleanor Westbrook called out. Mr. Mitchell. He stopped, turning slowly. I believe you left this, she said, holding up the email she had quoted. I'd like you to have it. As a reminder. Jordan's jaw clenched visibly as he crossed the room to take the paper from her hand. As he did, Eleanor spoke again, her voice low enough that only those of us closest could hear. My father taught me that character reveals itself most clearly in how we treat people when we hold power over them, she said. Remember that, young man. It might serve you better than that expensive suit. After the meeting disbanded, Timothy invited the executive team to his office for a celebratory toast. As glasses of champagne were distributed, he raised his in my direction. To Mia Chen, he said. Who showed us that the right thing is often the smart thing, too. The team echoed his toast, and I felt a flush of pride mixed with something deeper, vindication, perhaps, or simply the relief of knowing that standing your ground can sometimes lead to victory rather than exile. Later, as we were leaving, Eleanor Westbrook pulled me aside. That email, I said. How did you get it? She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes despite her dignified appearance. When Timothy told me about the potential acquisition and your counterproposal, I did some research on Meridian's consultant. Found quite a few disgruntled former employees eager to share their experiences. She patted my arm. Jordan Mitchell has a talent for making enemies, it seems. Thank you. I said sincerely. Your support made all the difference. I recognize courage when I see it, Ms. Chen. 2 years ago, you risked your career to stand by your father and expose a toxic culture. Today, you helped save my family's company from a similar fate. Her eyes, remarkably like Timothy's, held mine. The world needs more dragons and fewer suits, don't you think? The word, dragon, caught me by surprise. My father's nickname for me. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone at Westbrook. Eleanor smiled at my confusion. Timothy speaks highly of you, including some details from your personal story that resonated with me. She squeezed my hand once before walking away. We see you, Mia Chen. And we're grateful. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Financing had to be secured. Legal documents drafted and signed, transition plans implemented. The management buyout would transform Westbrook from a publicly traded company to a private enterprise, with Timothy retaining majority ownership and key executives, including myself, receiving equity stakes. Throughout the process, I kept waiting. For some retaliation from Jordan, a whisper campaign, a threatened lawsuit, something to express his undoubted rage at being thwarted. But there was nothing. He seemed to have disappeared entirely from the Seattle business scene. Maybe he learned his lesson, Alex suggested one evening as our team worked late finalizing the restructuring documents. I raised an eyebrow skeptically. People like Jordan don't learn lessons. They just change tactics. Nearly a month after the board meeting, with the buyout almost complete, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mia Chen. Hello, Mia. The voice was instantly recognizable. Jordan. I considered hanging up, but curiosity won out. What do you want, Jordan? To concede, he said, surprising me. You won this round. Impressively. I remained silent, waiting. Jordan Mitchell never made social calls, especially not to admit defeat. I'm leaving Seattle, he continued. Meridian has offered me a position at their London office. Senior Vice President of European Operations. Congratulations, I said. Neutrally. Why are you telling me this? Professional courtesy, he replied. And to let you know there are no hard feelings on my part. I almost laughed. No hard feelings? You threatened my father, tried to destroy my company, and attempted to dismantle everything I've built. Business, he said simply. Nothing personal. It's always personal, Jordan. That's what you never understood. Business is people. Their lives, their families, their well-being. When you treat them as disposable, you ultimately fail. There was a pause, then, an interesting philosophy. Perhaps someday we'll see which approach proves more sustainable in the long run. We already have, I countered. Goodbye, Jordan. Enjoy London. After hanging up, I sat for a long moment, turning the conversation over in my mind. No hard feelings? The man was either delusional or playing some longer game I couldn't yet see. Either way, I had more important matters to focus on. The management buyout was completed on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 6 weeks after the board vote. Timothy hosted a company-wide gathering in the main atrium to make the announcement official. Nearly 800 employees filled the space. An atmosphere of nervous excitement palpable in the crowd. For 3 generations, the Westbrook name has stood for excellence, integrity, and innovation, Timothy began. Today, we begin a new chapter in that legacy, one that ensures those values continue to guide us for generations to come. He outlined the changes, the transition from public to private ownership, the expansion plans, the strengthened commitment to sustainability and employee well-being. Then he introduced the new executive team, calling each of us to join him on the platform. When my name was announced, the applause took me by surprise, not polite acknowledgement but genuine enthusiasm, particularly from the marketing division. Staff who had thrived under the culture we'd created together. And finally, Timothy concluded, I'm pleased to announce the creation of a new position, Chief Culture Officer. This role will ensure that as we grow, we never lose sight of the human foundation that makes our success possible. He turned to me with a smile. Mia Chen has agreed to take on this responsibility in addition to her marketing leadership, effective immediately. The surprise must have shown on my face because Timothy winked almost imperceptibly. We hadn't discussed this addition to my role, but as the applause swelled around me, I realized it was perfect, a formal recognition that culture wasn't some HR afterthought but a core strategic priority. Later, at the reception that followed, I found myself surrounded by employees eager to share their ideas for further strengthening Westbrook's human-centered approach. One conversation particularly stuck with me, a young programmer from the tech division, barely a year out of college. Before I came to Westbrook, I had an internship at a startup where the CEO bragged about their hustle culture, she told me. We slept under our desks, worked 20-hour days, and competed to see who could sacrifice the most. I developed anxiety so severe I couldn't eat. She gestured around the room at the relaxed, engaged employees celebrating together. This is different. Here I feel like my work matters and I matter. I actually do better work because I'm not exhausted and terrified all the time. That's exactly the point, I said, smiling. Humans who are respected and supported do better work than humans who are exploited and burned out. It's not complicated, yet somehow it's revolutionary. She nodded eagerly. I've been developing a wellness app on the side, tracking stress levels, suggesting micro-breaks, that sort of thing. Do you think the company might be interested in piloting it? This was the kind of innovation that emerged when people felt secure enough to think beyond survival, when they had the energy and psychological safety to create rather than merely comply. Send me a proposal, I told her. I'd love to see it. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the building's rooftop terrace, taking a moment of quiet amid the celebration. The Seattle skyline glittered against the dark water of the Sound, a view that never failed to center me. Quite a day, Timothy said, joining me at the railing. How does it feel to be a company owner? I smiled. Surreal. Exciting. Terrifying. All appropriate responses, he chuckled. I felt the same when my father first gave me shares in the company. Suddenly what had been a job became a legacy. Speaking of surprises, I said, Chief Culture Officer? Timothy shrugged, unapologetic. The idea came to me during the board meeting. Watching you defend not just our business model but the values behind it, I realized we needed to formalize that priority at the highest level. He looked out at the city lights. My grandfather used to say that culture is what happens when nobody's watching. But I think it's more accurate to say culture is what you choose to see when you have the power to look away. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Jordan had chosen to look away from the human cost of his business practices. Timothy, Eleanor, and now our new leadership team were choosing to keep that cost front and center in every decision. I received an interesting call today, I said after a moment. Jordan Mitchell. He's taking a position with Meridian in London. Timothy's eyebrows rose. Should we be concerned? I don't think so. Not immediately, anyway. He claimed there were no hard feelings. A man like that doesn't forget, Timothy cautioned. Or forgive. I know, I acknowledged. But he's an ocean away, and we have more important things to focus on. Timothy raised his glass. To focusing on what matters. I clinked my glass against his. To what matters. 3 months into our new chapter, Westbrook was thriving. The transition had energized rather than disrupted operations, with productivity actually increasing as employees embraced their stake in the company's future. My dual role as CMO and Chief Culture Officer kept me busier than ever, but it was fulfilling work, the kind that energized rather than depleted. My father returned from his world tour, tanned and rejuvenated, full of stories and photographs from destinations I'd only dreamed of visiting. He'd made friends in every port, it seemed, collecting experiences with the same enthusiasm he'd once brought to collecting fishing lures. I'm thinking of writing a book, he announced over dinner at my condo. Not about the travels, exactly, but about second chances. About what happens when you face your mortality and then get the gift of more time. I'd read that book, I told him sincerely. He studied me across the table, his expression softening. You know, little dragon, watching you stand up to that boss of yours, that was my second chance too. What do you mean? After your mother left, I was so focused on providing stability, on making sure you never felt the economic insecurity I grew up with. He sighed. I worked too much. Missed too many moments. Told myself it was necessary, that it was for you and Kim. I reached for his hand, surprised by this revelation. My childhood memories were filled with my father's presence, not his absence, fishing trips, science fair projects, movie nights where he'd fallen asleep on the couch but insisted he was just resting his eyes. Dad, you were always there for us. Not always, he said gently. And watching you nearly make the same mistake, putting work above everything, even when it was literally life or death, it was like seeing my own choices reflected back at me. When you chose differently, when you found a way to honor both your ambition and your humanity. He squeezed my hand. You taught your old man something important. The conversation shifted something in my understanding of my own journey. I had seen my confrontation with Jordan as a personal victory, a moment of standing up for myself. But it was also part of a larger pattern, a generational correction, breaking cycles that extended beyond my own career. That realization deepened my commitment to the culture work at Westbrook. We weren't just creating a better workplace, we were modeling alternatives to toxic patterns that had been normalized for generations. Every policy, every decision was a chance to ask, does this honor both ambition and humanity? Does this recognize that people are whole beings, not just productivity machines? One Tuesday morning, about 6 months after the buyout, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. My assistant appeared at my door, looking slightly perplexed. There's a woman here to see you, she said. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Her name is Vanessa Mitchell. Mitchell. The surname immediately raised my guard. Did she say what it's regarding? Just that it's a personal matter and she won't take much of your time. Curiosity won out over caution. Send her in. The woman who entered was in her early 30s, stylishly dressed but not in the powersuit manner of Meridian executives. She had Jordan's eyes, I noticed immediately, but her expression held none of his calculation. Miss Chen, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I'm Jordan Mitchell's sister. I gestured for her to sit. What can I do for you, Ms. Mitchell? She settled into the chair across from my desk, her posture straight but not rigid. First, I want to apologize for my brother's behavior toward you and your father. It was inexcusable. The statement was so unexpected that for a moment I simply stared at her. Second, she continued, I want to thank you. Thank me? I echoed, confused. Vanessa Mitchell smiled slightly. Jordan's move to London wasn't entirely by choice. After what happened with Westbrook, after that email was exposed, Meridian decided he had become a liability in the American market. The London position was essentially a demotion disguised as a promotion, less responsibility, further from the center of power. I maintained a neutral expression, unsure where this was heading. The thing is, she went on, it might be the best thing that's ever happened to him. To all of us, really? I'm not sure I understand. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. My brother has been difficult. For as long as I can remember. Brilliant but cold. Ambitious to the point of obsession. Our father was similar, demanding, never satisfied, equating success with worth. Her expression softened. The London move forced Jordan to slow down. His wife threatened divorce if he continued working the same hours. His doctor warned him about his blood pressure and stress levels. She reached into her bag and removed a small envelope, placing it on my desk. 3 weeks ago, Jordan had a minor heart attack. Nothing severe, a warning sign rather than a crisis. But it scared him. Really scared him. I felt an unexpected twinge of empathy, remembering the fear that had gripped me when my own father faced heart problems. Inside that envelope is a letter from Jordan, Vanessa said. Not an apology, exactly, he's not quite there yet. But an acknowledgement. A beginning, perhaps. I made no move to take the envelope. Why deliver this personally? Why not mail it? Because I wanted to see for myself, she replied candidly. The woman who finally showed my brother there are consequences to treating people as disposable. The woman whose company culture is being written about in business journals as a case study in sustainable success. She smiled again, more warmly. This time, I run a small nonprofit focused on workplace mental health. Your approach at Westbrook aligns with everything we advocate for. After Vanessa left, I sat for a long time looking at the unopened envelope on my desk. Finally, I slipped it into my drawer without reading it. Whatever acknowledgement Jordan had written could wait. Today wasn't about him or his journey toward potential redemption. Today was about the quarterly review where we would announce the pilot program for the wellness app developed by our young programmer. It was about the expanded parental leave policy we were implementing. It was about the mentorship initiative connecting our senior staff with underserved high school students interested in business careers. The true victory wasn't in changing Jordan Mitchell, it was in creating alternatives to his model of success. It was in proving, quarter after quarter, that humanity and profitability weren't opposing forces but complementary strengths. As I gathered my materials for the review meeting, my phone chimed with a text from my father, lunch tomorrow? Thinking of starting a small consulting practice helping companies implement humanistic policies. Could use your expert input, little dragon. I smiled, typing back, absolutely. And I know just the chief culture officer who might send some clients your way. The journey that had begun with an impossible choice between my father's surgery and an $8 million client meeting had led to something I couldn't have imagined that day in Jordan's office, not just a better job or a more balanced life, but a movement. A growing community of business leaders, employees, and advocates demonstrating that success built on exploitation was neither necessary nor sustainable. The greatest revenge against toxic workplace culture wasn't exposing it or defeating its champions, though those were satisfying milestones along the way. The greatest revenge was rendering it obsolete by building something better. As I walked into the quarterly review meeting, surrounded by engaged colleagues who brought their whole, healthy selves to work each day, I realized that success isn't measured by the power you hold over others, but by the strength you help others discover in themselves. My father had tried to teach me that lesson years ago. Sometimes the most important wisdom takes the longest to learn, but when it finally clicks, it changes everything. 5 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. 5 years of growth, challenge, innovation, and most importantly, validation. That our approach wasn't just morally right but financially sound. Westbrook had doubled in size, expanding into new markets while maintaining the core values that defined us. The management buyout that had once seemed so risky was now studied in business schools as a case of principled leadership creating sustainable value. On a crisp autumn morning, I stood backstage at the National Business Ethics Conference, reviewing my notes one last time before delivering the keynote address. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years ago, I'd been labeled difficult and unprofessional for insisting on basic human decency in the workplace. Now I was being celebrated as a visionary. 2 minutes, Ms. Chen, the event coordinator said, adjusting my microphone. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Public speaking had become a regular part of my role as Westbrook's success gained attention. But this particular audience, over 2,000 business leaders, academics, and policymakers, still triggered a flutter of nerves. My phone buzzed with a text from my father, knock em dead, little dragon. Watching the live stream with Kim and the kids. His support, unwavering as always, centered me. Dad's consulting practice had taken off, his first-hand experience with both heart disease and toxic work environments giving him unique credibility with clients. At 73, he was busier than ever, traveling the country helping companies implement what he called whole human policies. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator's voice echoed through the speakers. Please welcome our keynote speaker, Chief Executive Officer of Westbrook Industries, Mia Chen. I walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, the bright lights momentarily blinding. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out faces in the front rows, attentive, curious, some skeptical. Perfect. Skeptics were often the most satisfying to convince. 5 years ago, I was forced to make an impossible choice: be with my father during his emergency heart surgery, or attend a client meeting worth $8 million to my company. My boss at the time made it clear that choosing family would end my career. The room quieted, people leaning forward slightly. What he didn't realize, what too many leaders still don't understand, is that by framing it as a choice between humanity and success, he was already failing. Not just morally, but strategically. For the next 40 minutes, I shared Westbrook's journey, the data, the challenges, the innovations, and most importantly, the results. I spoke about our employee retention rates, 94% compared to the industry average of 72%, our client satisfaction metrics, consistently in the top decile, and our profitability, outperforming competitors by an average of 23% year over year. The evidence is irrefutable, I concluded. Workplaces that honor the whole human, that recognize employees as people with families, health needs, and lives beyond their desks, don't just feel better. They perform better. They innovate more effectively. They build stronger client relationships. They create sustainable success rather than the sugar high of burnout-fueled sprints. The standing ovation that followed was gratifying, but what mattered more were the conversations afterward, CEOs asking detailed questions about implementation, HR directors taking notes on our policies, business school professors requesting case studies for their curricula. Change was happening, not just at Westbrook but across industries. Not overnight, and not without resistance, but steadily, company by company, leader by leader. As the crowd dispersed, a conference organizer approached with a woman I didn't recognize, professionally dressed, perhaps in her early 40s, with an air of quiet confidence. "Ms. Chen, this is Catherine Westbrook, CEO of Meridian Partners. She specifically requested to meet you." Westbrook. The surname registered immediately, though I kept my expression neutral as we shook hands. "No relation to Timothy Westbrook," she clarified, noticing my reaction. "Though I've admired his company for years." "It's a pleasure to meet you," I said, professional courtesy overriding my instinctive wariness of anyone connected to Meridian. I wasn't aware of a leadership change at Meridian. Catherine smiled slightly. "It's recent. The board appointed me 3 months ago after a rather dramatic shareholder revolt. Your name actually came up during my interview process." "Oh?" I maintained a neutral tone while mentally reviewing what I knew about Meridian since our confrontation. 5 years ago. They'd struggled with several failed acquisitions, lost key clients, and faced increasing scrutiny over their workplace practices. "Your keynote resonated with me," Catherine continued. "Particularly because Meridian represents the counterargument, the case study in what happens when a company refuses to evolve past the burn and churn model." She gestured to a quieter corner of the reception area. As we moved away from the crowd, she spoke more candidly. "I was brought in to rebuild after years of declining performance. The previous leadership, including your former boss, insisted that their approach was the only path to success in our industry. Meanwhile, firms like Westbrook were proving them wrong quarter after quarter." "Jordan Mitchell," I said, the name still carrying an emotional charge even after 5 years. "Is he still with Meridian?" Catherine's expression confirmed the answer before she spoke. "No. He was among the first to go when the new board took control. His division in London had the highest turnover rate in the company, 83% annually. Client retention was abysmal." I absorbed this information, feeling neither satisfaction nor regret, just a quiet acknowledgement of patterns playing out to their logical conclusion. "I'd like to propose something unexpected," Catherine said. "A collaboration between Westbrook and Meridian." The suggestion was so surprising I nearly laughed. "A collaboration? Our companies have been rivals for years." "Precisely why it makes sense," she countered. "Meridian has global reach and established client relationships. Westbrook has pioneered a more effective operational model and culture. Together, we could accelerate change industry-wide." She outlined a vision of joint initiatives, research projects, shared best practices, perhaps even co-developed client solutions. Not a merger or acquisition, but a strategic partnership that would maintain each company's independence while leveraging complementary strengths. "It's an interesting proposal," I acknowledged. "But given our history, there would be significant trust barriers to overcome." Catherine nodded. I understand. I'm not asking for an answer today. Just an openness to continue the conversation. She handed me her card. My direct line is on the back. Call anytime. That evening, back in my hotel room, I called Timothy to share the unexpected encounter. Now Westbrook's chairman while I served as CEO, he remained my most trusted advisor and friend. Meridian wants to collaborate, he repeated, sounding as surprised as I had been. That's unexpected. Catherine Westbrook seems genuine, I said. And their recent struggles are well documented. I think they're truly looking to change direction. The question is whether they're looking to learn from us or absorb us, Timothy pointed out. Remember, their first approach 5 years ago was also presented as a partnership of sorts. This feels different, I replied. But I'm proceeding with caution. I promised nothing except to consider the conversation. After we hung up, I found myself opening my laptop, searching for information about Jordan Mitchell. His digital footprint had diminished significantly in recent years, no prominent executive positions, no speaking engagements, no thought leadership articles. He had effectively disappeared from the business world I inhabited. I thought about the letter his sister had delivered 5 years ago, still unopened in my desk drawer back in Seattle. Whatever acknowledgement or justification it contained had never seemed important enough to read. Jordan Mitchell had been a catalyst in my journey, but not its purpose or destination. The conference continued for 2 more days, my schedule packed with panels, roundtables, and networking events. On the final evening, as I was preparing to head to the airport, my phone rang with an unfamiliar Seattle number. Mia Chen speaking. Ms. Chen, this is Dr. Reynolds from Northwest Memorial. The doctor's professional tone sent an immediate chill through me. I'm calling about your father, Robert Chen. The world seemed to stop, memories of that first cardiac emergency flooding back. What happened? Is he okay? He's stable, the doctor assured me quickly. He experienced some chest pain while giving a presentation this afternoon and came to the ER as a precaution. His initial tests look good, but given his history, we'd like to keep him overnight for observation. Relief weakened my knees, and I sank onto the edge of the hotel bed. I'm currently out of town. I can be on a plane in 2 hours. That's not necessary from a medical standpoint, Dr. Reynolds said. But I'm sure he'd appreciate seeing you tomorrow. He's quite insistent that you finish your important conference first. That sounded exactly like my father. Always putting others before himself, even now. Can I speak with him? Of course. I'll transfer you. There was a brief silence, then my father's voice, strong and clear. Mia? Don't you dare cancel your flight to rush back here. This is nothing, just an old man who had too much coffee and too little sleep. Dad, I began, the worry evident in my voice. I mean it, he interrupted. Kim is already here, and the doctors say everything looks fine. Probably just indigestion, but they're being cautious because of my history. Are you sure? I can change my flight. Positive. Your panel tomorrow is too important to miss. The one about implementing ethical leadership in established companies? That's the whole reason I was giving my presentation today, preparing business leaders to work with your guidelines. I hesitated, torn between responsibility and family, the very conflict that had defined so much of my journey. Mia, my father said gently, this isn't like last time. I'm not having surgery. I'm sitting up in bed arguing with nurses about whether I can have my laptop. Go finish what you started. I'll be here when you get back. After speaking with both my father and Kim, who confirmed the situation wasn't urgent, I decided to stay for the final day of the conference as planned. The difference between this moment and the crisis 5 years ago was stark. Now I had the agency to make a genuine choice, not an ultimatum disguised as one. I called Catherine Westbrook that evening, inviting her to breakfast before my final panel. If Meridian was serious about transformation, perhaps there was a role for Westbrook to play in that journey. The restaurant was quiet at 7 a.m., just a few early risers sipping coffee and checking emails. Catherine arrived precisely on time, dressed for business but with a relaxed confidence that suggested she no longer felt the need to project power through rigid formality. Thank you for making time, she said as we settled at a corner table. I know your schedule must be packed. I'm intrigued by your proposal, I admitted. But before we discuss collaboration, I need to understand what really changed at Meridian. Why now, after years of doubling down on the very practices we rejected? Catherine didn't hesitate. The financial reality became impossible to ignore. While companies like Westbrook were growing sustainably, Meridian was caught in a cycle of diminishing returns. We'd push employees to the breaking point, deliver short-term results, then watch as burnout led to mistakes, departures, and ultimately client dissatisfaction. She described how Meridian's board had initially replaced individual executives. then adjusted compensation structures, then reorganized departments, all while maintaining the fundamental burn-and-churn culture. Nothing worked, she said simply. Because the problem wasn't organizational design or incentive alignment. It was the underlying belief that people are expendable resources rather than renewable assets. Her analysis was impressively candid, acknowledging the systemic failures rather than scapegoating individuals. What convinced the board to try a different approach? I asked. Data, she replied with a small smile. The same thing that convinced your board 5 years ago. We commissioned an independent analysis comparing Meridian's performance to competitors who had adopted more sustainable practices. The results were unambiguous. She pulled out her tablet, showing me graphs that told a clear story of Meridian's decline relative to firms like Westbrook. What struck me most was how closely the patterns matched the data I'd presented in my original confrontation with Jordan, the inverse correlation between burnout rates and sustainable success. So the board decided to bring in new leadership. I concluded. Catherine nodded. With a clear mandate for cultural transformation. Which brings me back to our potential collaboration. Westbrook has already solved problems we're just beginning to address. Rather than reinventing the wheel, we could learn from your experience. And what would Westbrook gain from this partnership? I asked. Access to global markets where Meridian has established presence. Joint research initiatives with our data science team, which remains world-class despite our other challenges. And perhaps most valuable, the opportunity to accelerate industry-wide change by transforming one of the most prominent holdouts of the old model. By the time we finished breakfast, I was cautiously optimistic about the possibility. We agreed to schedule a more formal discussion with our respective leadership teams the following month, focusing on specific initiatives rather than vague intentions. My final panel went smoothly, the audience particularly engaged when I discussed practical implementation strategies for cultural transformation. As I was gathering my materials afterward, an older gentleman approached, waiting patiently while I spoke with other attendees. When we were finally alone, he extended his hand. Miss Chen, I don't expect you to remember me. Walter Mitchell. I believe you knew my son, Jordan. The revelation froze me momentarily. The family resemblance was subtle but unmistakable, the same sharp eyes, though Walter's held a weariness Jordan's had not. Mr. Mitchell, I acknowledged, shaking his hand. This is unexpected. I've been following your work, he said. Your approach to leadership, it challenges many of the principles I instilled in my children. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Principles I now recognize were fundamentally flawed. The admission clearly cost him something, his pride perhaps, or his certainty in the worldview he'd championed for decades. Jordan never told you about his mother, did he? Walter asked. I shook my head, uncertain where this was leading. She left when he was 12. Not because she stopped loving him, but because I gave her the same impossible choices I later taught him to give others. Work or family. Ambition or humanity. His expression softened with regret. I chose wrong so many times that eventually there was no choice left for her. The parallel to my own family history, a single father raising children after their mother left, was striking, though the lessons my father had imparted were profoundly different. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I want you to understand that the damage doesn't begin or end with one bad boss, Walter replied. It's generational. Systemic. He gestured toward the conference beyond us. What you're doing here, changing how we define success, challenging the false choices, it matters beyond business metrics. He reached into his jacket, removing an envelope similar to the one Jordan's sister had given me years ago. My son is not well. The heart attack he suffered was more serious than his sister may have conveyed. He's undergone several procedures since then and is currently awaiting a transplant. I absorbed this news with complicated emotions, not satisfaction certainly, but not uncomplicated sympathy either. Jordan asked me to deliver this, Walter continued, offering the envelope. He wrote it during his recovery but wasn't ready to send it until recently. I understand if you choose not to read it. Unlike the first letter, I accepted this one, though I made no promises about reading it. I'm sorry about your son's health. I said sincerely. Whatever our professional conflicts, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Walter nodded gratefully. Thank you for listening, Miss Chen. And for showing so many of us a better way forward. On the flight home that evening, I finally opened both letters, first the one delivered by Vanessa 5 years ago, then the more recent one from Walter. The first was brief, formal, acknowledging that his approach had been counterproductive, but stopping short of a genuine apology. The second, written after years of health struggles and professional decline, was different. I was wrong, Jordan had written in an unsteady hand. Not just about that day with your father, but about everything. Success built on broken people isn't success at all. It took losing nearly everything to understand what you knew instinctively. The letter continued, detailing his journey from London to medical leave to eventual retirement, his marriage ending along the way, his relationships with his children strained by years of absence. He didn't ask for forgiveness or even understanding, just offered recognition of patterns he'd perpetuated and was now trying to break even as his health failed. My father taught me that weakness was failure, he wrote near the end. Now I understand that refusing to acknowledge our human limitations is the true failure. I hope those you're teaching listen better than I did. I folded the letter, neither triumphant nor vengeful, just reflective. Jordan's story was, in many ways, the road not taken, the warning of where unbridled ambition divorced from humanity ultimately leads. My father was waiting at the airport when I landed, against medical advice but entirely in character. Despite his protests that he was perfectly fine, I could see the fatigue around his eyes, the slightly slower pace of his movements. The doctor said you should be resting, I scolded gently as we walked to my car. Being alone in that empty house isn't restful, he countered. Besides, I wanted to hear about your speech. The live stream cut out halfway through. As we drove, I shared highlights from the conference, including the unexpected encounters with Catherine Westbrook and Walter Mitchell. My father listened thoughtfully, asking insightful questions about the potential Meridian collaboration. It's quite something, he said when I finished. 5 years ago, you were fighting for basic dignity in a toxic workplace. Now industry leaders are coming to you for guidance on transformation. It's not just me, I reminded him. It's what we built at Westbrook, what you've been teaching through your consulting. It's a movement bigger than any individual. We pulled into his driveway, the modest house where he'd lived since retiring from teaching welcoming with Lightside program to turn on automatically at sunset. Inside, I insisted on making dinner while he rested, ignoring his protests that he was perfectly capable of working a microwave. As we ate at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd done homework as a child, where we'd played cards during power outages, where we'd planned fishing trips on summer evenings, I found myself studying my father's face. The lines were deeper now, his hair completely silver, but his eyes still held the same warmth and wisdom that had guided me through every challenge. I met with my cardiologist before the conference, he said, seeming to read my thoughts. She says I'm doing well for a man my age, especially considering the surgery 5 years ago. But, I prompted, hearing the unspoken qualifier. But nothing lasts forever, little dragon. His smile was gentle. I'm 73. I've lived a good life, especially these last 5 years. Traveled the world, helped change how companies treat their people, watched my brilliant daughter become the leader I always knew she could be. Dad, he reached across the table, taking my hand. I'm not going anywhere just yet. But I want you to know that whatever time I have, whether it's 5 more years or 20, is fuller and richer because of the choice you made that day. Because you found a way to honor both your ambition and your humanity, even when the world told you it was impossible. Later that night, after ensuring my father was comfortably settled with strict instructions to call if he needed anything, I sat on my balcony overlooking the Seattle skyline. The city lights reflected on the dark water of the Sound, steady and constant like the principles that had guided my journey. I thought about the path that had led me here, from that moment in Jordan's office being forced to choose between my father's surgery and a client meeting, to the confrontation that followed, to building something better at Westbrook, to now helping other companies transform their own cultures. The greatest lesson wasn't that toxic workplaces eventually fail, though the data clearly showed they do. It wasn't that standing up for yourself can lead to better opportunities, though my experience confirmed that possibility. It wasn't even that balance creates more sustainable success, though 5 years of Westbrook's growth had proven that conclusively. The greatest lesson was that the either/or choices presented by people like Jordan Mitchell are almost always false dichotomies. We don't have to choose between ambition and compassion, between success and humanity, between achievement and wholeness. The most powerful path forward embraces both. As business leaders, as colleagues, as humans, we have the capacity to create environments where people thrive professionally without sacrificing what makes life meaningful. Where excellence doesn't require exploitation. Where the measure of success includes not just what we achieve, but how we achieve it and who we become in the process. My phone chimed with a message from Catherine Westbrook confirming our leadership meeting for the following month. Another from Timothy sharing projections for our newest sustainability initiative. A third from the conference organizer asking if I'd consider writing a book about Westbrook's transformation journey. Each message represented a path forward, an opportunity to expand the impact of what we'd built. Not through force or fear or false choices, but through proving, again and again, that the sustainable path is ultimately the successful one. I texted my father before heading to bed, "Love you, Dad. Breakfast tomorrow? I'm thinking about writing that book." His reply came immediately, "Love you too, little dragon. The world needs your story. See you at 9. 5 years after facing an impossible choice between my father's surgery and an $8 million client meeting, I had found something I never expected, not just a better way to work, but a better way to live. Not just professional success, but personal wholeness. Not just a career, but a calling. And in that discovery lay the most powerful revenge of all, not destroying what was broken, but building something better in its place. Something that would outlast any individual, career or company. Something that could change not just an industry, but the lives of everyone it touched. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in defeating your opponents, but in creating a world where their approach no longer makes sense. Where the Jordan Mitchells eventually become cautionary tales rather than role models. Where we measure success not by what we sacrifice, but by what we sustain. That's not just revenge. That's revolution. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.